Hello guys, welcome to my new video, and today we're looking at the best ranged DPS classes in BfA 8.3 in Mythic Plus and raids, and I'm going to give you my recommendations of classes that are relatively easy to gear, relatively easy to play and pick up, or classes that are hard to master but are going to give you the biggest benefit. And we'll talk about it later on, but I did a video like this about healers, and the main reason I'm redoing these videos is because corruption vendors here. All of a sudden, certain classes that have availability or have a chance of stacking certain stat amps. For example, Warrior is a prime example. Fury was an extremely popular spec at 8.3 or before 8.3. Before the corruption vendor, Fury was doing really well. And all of a sudden, with the corruption vendor, with expedient stacking being available, arms have become the more popular option. So this is how corruption vendor can impact certain specs. So keep in mind, a disclaimer, I won't be covering every single ranged spec in the game. I'll be concentrating on every single range class and covering specs that are the strongest for that class. And right now we can go and start looking at the raid setup. Keep in mind, Ny'alotha parses are a bit of a meme because the bosses are dying really quickly, and we'll talk about Mythic Plus later on. I'll give you my recommendations. So let's get started with the raid. So no real big surprise here, fire mages are really strong. A lot of people have predicted this because at the start of 8.3 a lot of fire mages were stacking masterful. But at the start of 8.3, you have to be lucky to get masterful. So now with the corruption vendor, mages are just going masterful. They're going an insane amount of masterful corruption stacking to an extent that 70 plus is not uncommon. Now you might ask yourself, 70 plus corruption, what happens if you get the thing from beyond hitting you? You're going to die. What are you going to do? This is the reason why a lot of fire mages will be running defensive talents, things like Ice Ward, which is going to give you 2 Frost Novas, and you're able to keep the thing from beyond at bay, and you can blink away and things like that. So all of a sudden, really high risk, high reward type of a class right now, which is highly gear dependent as well. So keep that in mind. But generally speaking, in Ny'alotha, there are 2 different kind of builds available, and it's all about the combustion. Fire Mage is all about combustion. If you mess this up, your damage is going to be very bad. If you play it well with certain trinkets and you optimize it, you're going to be a god tier DPS. So if you look at the fire mage builds right now, they're available in Ny'alotha. You can see that there is, again, a general 2-minute combustion build with Meteor and Memory of Lucid Dreams Major. This is quite common on fights where you want to use combust. Every 2 minutes, let's say trash packs or let's say mobs appear every 2 minutes. This is a prime example for this. If you feel that you need a combustion on a lower cooldown, which again, this build is very popular in Mythic Plus and raids as well, depending whether you need a strong cooldown every 1 minute or so, Kindling build with World Wane is very strong as well. So basically these 2 builds are somewhat similar in power, but they're basically determined on the boss fight, determined on the Mythic Plus fight. Can you or do you need a cooldown every 2 minutes or every 1 minute? And you will play this based on that. So now all of a sudden as a fire mage, not only you have the versatility or flexibility of different cooldown usages, you're also able to exploit the corruption system because of your survivability. We'll talk about how they are gear dependent in the Mythic Plus section, but right now let's go look at other range DPS classes in Ny'alotha. And Shadow Priests are doing really well right now, considering that in 8.3 they got a big nerf. Their community perception was not all that great, but I don't want to talk about Shadow Priests yet. I want to talk about Beast Mastery Hunters, because Beast Mastery is probably the most popular spec right now and one of the most overpowered specs in the game, and I'll talk about this. If you look at the parse numbers in Ny'alotha, you can see that Beast Mastery is the most popular spec. All of the people are flocking to Beastmaster. It is the best time to be a Beast Mastery Hunter because not only they're super simple to play, and believe me, I have a Beast Mastery Hunter because I was one of those people who flocked to Beast Mastery. I have a Beast Mastery Hunter, they're super easy to play, and I'll talk about why they're scaling so well. So first of all, if you look at the logs for Ny'alotha, if you look at how Beast Mastery plays, their corruption. So first of all, in terms of corruption, a lot of people are going a mixed bag. A bit of severes, that means critical strike, a bit of expedience, which means haste, and maybe 1 or 2 masterful. And this is going to change, or it's going to be dependent on your character. Again, sim yourself type of deal is very important, but generally speaking, look at this. They have 2 big cooldowns, Bestial Wrath and Aspect Wild. They're 2 minutes and 1.5 minutes. They're 1.5 minutes if you use Vision of Perfection, which you might be using. Now, another big advantage of Beast Mastery Hunter is Vision of Perfection. A lot of people don't have Blood of the Enemy to be used in Mythic Plus environment because Blood of the Enemy requires PvP. Beastmaster Hunter becomes a really decent solid choice for an out because Vision of Perfection, one of the easiest essences to get in the game for rank 3, is very solid for Beastmaster Hunter in raids and Mythic Plus. Another plus for the Hunter. And all of a sudden those cooldowns, the way that they interact, the way they synergize with Hunter abilities is insanely crazy for their scaling. They're a class on steroids. All of a sudden your passive Wild Call as a Hunter, your auto shot crits have a chance to reset your barb shot. Your barb shot has or will reduce the cooldown of your Bestial Rat. More auto shot crits, more chances of barb shot resets, more barb shots, less cooldown on Bestial Rat. Then you have multi-shot and Aspect of the Wild. If you have rapid reload, and you should, this is one of the most mandatory traits for Mythic Plus or AoE situations. Rapid reload, your multi-shot will reduce the cooldown of Aspect of the Wild. Aspect of the Wild is going to give you focus and other cool things. So all of a sudden, look at the scenario, especially in Mythic Plus. You go into AoE pack, you're spamming multi-shot. All of a sudden your multi-shot with rapid reload is going to reduce the cooldown of Aspect of the Wild. Aspect of the Wild, you use it, you get more focus, you can spam more multi-shot. It's a vicious cycle that leads to Beast Mastery being so overpowered. All of a sudden, with things like Whispered Truths, the Skitra Bow, with your Corruption, like, you know, your Severes, your Expedience, your Masterful, you are a God tier single target player, God tier AoE class. It's just insane. There is not a single fight with Beastmaster Hunter is not overpowered. Legitimately, you can play this class with one hand and then use your other hand to drink your favorite beverage. I've done this multiple times, but it's an easy class to play, and one of the biggest advantages is that you're able to perform your full rotation on the move. So all of a sudden, any boss fight, any Mythic Plus boss that requires heavy movement, you don't care. You can perform your full rotation on the move. Extremely important for new players because that's probably the biggest mistake that new players make in the game as a range DPS. Trying to predict their movement and things like that. So this completely eliminates that. This is why Beastmaster Hunter is probably one of the strongest classes, and I'll talk about their Mythic Plus performance later on. So let's go and have a look at other range DPS classes, and in this case I'm going to be looking at Warlock. Now Warlock, Destruction Warlock is by far the most popular choice right now. I know you can see here Affliction and the Demonology being here, but if you really look at the parses, Destruction is by far the most popular with 91,000. If you look at the next one, Affliction is really just a small percentage. And there's a reason why Destruction Warlocks are so popular. Now, Destruction or Warlocks in general have always been seen like this. A mandatory class in raids and a somewhat poor class in Mythic Plus. And this is still kind of persisting in the game. And I'll talk about the Mythic Plus version later on. But generally speaking, Destruction Warlock is one of the classes that have benefited greatly from Corruption Vendor. All of a sudden, expedient, haste is all about Destro playstyle. It's so crazy that it even led Destruction Warlocks having mana issues. To what extreme Destruction Warlocks have been going with Expedient. Generally speaking, if you're playing Destruction Warlock, you know that they're like bread and butter. They're one of the signature abilities. Havoc means that they're one of the best two-target cleave DPS spec in the game. On top of the fact that in raids, just think about this. Every single N tier boss in BfA has required, and I mean required, Warlock gateways. You need 1 or 2 Warlocks to do the last bosses throughout the whole BfA. Warlock gateways have been the staple of raiding for such a long time that you will need 1 or 2 Warlocks purely just for the gateways alone, on top of the fact that they do provide really good DPS as well. So it's a win-win situation for Warlock in raid situations, but Mythic Plus is a whole different story, and we'll talk about that later on. Now the reason I kind of delayed talking about Shadow Priest, because Shadow Priest has really become, or the DPS shads have been doing really well, considering that they were doing quite poor at the start of 8.3. Now in terms of corruption, Shadow Priests have all been getting a mixture of severe and expedient, so crit and haste. A decent mixture of those have really led Shadow Priests to performing pretty well in raid situations where their multi-dotting capabilities are really strong. Now you have to consider that Shadow Priests received a big nerf before Ny'alotha was released, so let's just have a look at Eternal Palace Shadow Priest performance. So you can see that Shadow Priests are the Fire Mages of Ny'alotha, and Fire Mages are right now the Shadow Priests of Eternal Palace. So you can see how the tables have turned for these two classes. A lot of the Shadow Priests that I know have re-rolled to Fire Mages in Ny'alotha because they seen this happening. They seen that Fire Mages were going to be extremely strong with Masterful, and they saw that the changes to Shadow Priests are going to be pretty severe. So even though Shadow Priests are doing really well, especially if you have the Corruption crit and Expedient and things like that, they're doing pretty well, and their Mythic Plus performance is somewhat decent. It's not amazing, but it's still there. And now let's go and talk about another class that needed some love in my opinion, and that is Balanced Druids. Now, Balanced Druids, historically speaking, in BfA have been the single target spec. And that's kind of weird because how many people remember Balanced Druid, that build in Legion, where the Starfall was actually relevant? So all of a sudden, Balanced Druids have shifted from this AoE type of dotting class in Legion to a single target priority DPS burster. And it's kind of weird to see this shift. And generally speaking, Balanced Druids in raids have been using a whole lot of different corruptions, from Gushing Wounds, from Infinite Stars for single target, to stat amps like Expedient or even Severe. And if you have a lot of Severe or Crit, you might be even using Strike Through. So all of a sudden, Balanced Druids don't really have the one best build in terms of corruption, and those type of classes tend to suffer the most. But if you actually look at the parse numbers, Balanced Druids are still very popular spec in the game in Ny'alotha, and you have to keep in mind that the rotation is not all that difficult with dotting up and using expanders and things like that. But generally speaking, if you have Starlord talent, it makes it a little bit more interesting in terms of, maybe not interesting, maybe a bit more difficult in terms of trying to maintain a high stack of haste buff and using your things like Star Surges early on, or pulling up your resources in order to maintain the highest uptime of high stacks. So there is intricacies to the build itself, but like I mentioned, it's mainly a single target DPS class, and we'll talk about Mythic Plus performance later on, but that is Balanced Druids, and the last range DPS class that I'm going to be covered for raiding. And Elemental Shaman has not been in the best in 8.3. They're kind of mid-tier of everything. They're probably one of the least popular specs in high-end Mythic Plus. And if you look at the fights, or historically speaking, if you look at Elemental Shamans, a lot of the times they had this strong niche where they could turn AoE situations into strong priority single target DPS. This was really popular in Crucible of Storms, where you would apply Flame Shocks and you would hope for Lava Surge, which is going to give you instant lava bursts, where you could apply on the boss. So if you have ads, apply Flame Shock, and then you get strong priority DPS. And this has generally been very strong for Elemental Shamans with Ignis potential stacking. Unfortunately, this was not as strong in Ny'alotha, or maybe their scaling wasn't all that great, because if you are progressing as Elemental Shaman in Ny'alotha, especially Mythic Ny'alotha, you probably were asked to sit out. Because the fact that in Mythic Ny'alotha you would need a certain amount of immunity classes, and all of a sudden it would be far more beneficial to bring an immunity class like a Beast Mastery Hunter who can soak the mechanics in Ny'alotha, rather than bringing an Elemental Shaman who will die, will have to use the Resurrection, but the Resurrection is a really long cooldown. As Elemental, you also have a really weird interaction with corruptions. Right now, Severe and Strike Through are very popular options both in raids and Mythic Plus, but the fact is that crit doesn't really scale that well with Ignis potential, because you have to remember, if a target is Flame Shock on them, Lava Burst is always gonna crit. So you kind of have to make choices depending on whether you're going to be doing a lot of AoE, a lot of single target. So you can see how Elemental Shamans have kind of lost out. Don't get me wrong, they're not the worst DPS, but generally speaking, they might not have a guaranteed spot in Mythic Ny'alotha progress in the same way that you can see their performance in Mythic Plus. And this is a great segment into the Mythic Plus section of the whole video. So let's have a look at Mythic Plus representation for range classes for 8.3 in BfA. And again, no real surprise here with Beast Mastery Hunter, with Fire Mages dominating, Mythic Plus 20 and up, because generally speaking that's not, to be honest, you probably would have to go higher to really have a breakpoint of where classes actually matter, but you can only go to 20 and up. So this is the breakdown. You can see that Destruction Warlock is still the most popular spec for Warlocks, but generally speaking it's not an insanely popular range spec. You can see that Balanced Druids are doing okay-ish, you can see that Shadow Priests are doing okay-ish, and Elemental Shaman is really not that popular. The general consensus on Mythic Plus meta is that range DPS, generally speaking, you don't want to have a lot of range DPS in your Mythic Plus composition because of interrupts. So it is hard to fit in multiple range classes. Beastmaster and Hunter has made it here mainly because they're so strong in single target, they're so strong in AoE, they're not cooldown dependent because they always have the cooldowns. And they have seen a lot of increase. They have a lot of utility as well with different pets. You have your heroism, you have things like removing and rage effects and things like that, or dispelling mobs. Your pets have a lot of utility depending on which pets you have. So generally speaking, Hunter, Beastmaster Hunter has been one of the most popular. Fire Mage is really strong, and this is going to go into the end of the video where I'm going to be recommending certain classes. If you're looking at the performance of really high-end Mythic Plus, so we're talking about higher than 20s, we're looking at 24s, 26, 27s, we're looking at the world first keys. I don't think you will be able to do like a plus 30, which has not happened yet, without a Fire Mage, especially on a fortified scenario. If you look at the overall DPS of some of your favorite streamers, some of your favorite Mythic Plus pushers, you can see that, let's say for example, a good Mythic Plus DPS on a fortified key can do like 130, 140k DPS overall, like a Beastmaster Hunter, which is very solid. And a good Fire Mage in that fortified dungeon, depending on which dungeon it is, can do 200 plus. Because like I mentioned before, Fire Mage with masterful stacking, Fire Mage with over 70 corruption, because they can use 2 Frost Novas, they can blink away. They are super high risk, high reward type of a class right now. Their combustion is so strong. Do you need a 1-minute combustion because of how the boss pulls or how the tank is going to pull? Do you need a 2-minute combustion, a really strong 2-minute combustion instead? So all of a sudden, I do feel that Fire Mage is one of the best DPS classes in the game. Not ranged, but best DPS classes in the game. But it's high risk, high reward. You need those braces from Mechagon. You need that Asharo's Font. Go and do Eternal Palace. So you are highly gear dependent. You need to play really safe because you're gonna be running over 70 corruption. Fire Mage is my suggestion for a player that's going to get that piece of gear. It's going to get those braces. It's going to get that Asharo's Font. It's going to optimize combustion to a max, and it's not going to pug. I don't feel Fire Mages are a good pug class in these lower keys. If you're going to pug those 15s and stuff like that, I think Frost is far easier because you don't know whether the tank is going to pull based on your combustion timers. So I do recommend that if you're going to just pug lower end content, Fire Mage a lot of the times is underutilized by the tanks. So this is why I say that the overall best beginners class and a class that's gonna give you probably the best numbers for the least amount of effort is going to be Beast Mastery Hunter, man. If there is a time to play Beast Mastery, whether you're a new player or experienced player, whether you feel like you want to really get a huge numbers for a little amount of effort, Beast Mastery is so strong, guys. It is absolutely insane. In terms of the essences you need, in terms of the corruptions that you need, it's not really overly difficult to get. Again, probably the hardest part for Beastmaster and Hunter is getting those shoulders that have rapid reload with good trades where you need to invest a certain amount of Titan Residum from the Mythic Plus vendor and things like that. That's probably the hardest part, and also getting the, you know, the Skitcher Bow can be hard as well. But generally speaking, this is a class that you can do your full rotation on the move. If a boss is really high mobility, you don't care. You have high utility. Your pets have a lot of utility that they provide. In terms of other classes, Warlock has always been, in BfA, a mandatory class in raids and not really that popular in Mythic Plus, mainly because they are somewhat cooldown dependent, like we're talking about destruction and things like that. And a lot of the times, like I mentioned, range spots are limited in Mythic Plus due to interrupts. So a lot of the times, a lot of Mythic Plus groups will either get a BM Hunter instead or a Fire Mage instead, which is performing better. So it's not that Warlocks are extremely bad, it's that other classes are extremely overpowered type of deal. And generally speaking, like I mentioned, Warlock is mandatory in raids and not that popular in Mythic Plus. And you can see that other classes like Shadow Priests, Balanced Druids, and especially Elemental Shamans have kind of fallen. So again, I hope this video was not too long. I hope you get a general look of how classes are performing. There's definitely classes that benefited more from Corruption Vendor than the others, and those classes that benefited more have kind of left everyone else in the dust and behind, and they've just become more and more popular. It's been kind of like a snowball effect where BM Hunters and Fire Mages have just been so extremely popular in Mythic Plus that what's the point of picking other classes besides them? And again, it is kind of sad, but this is the end of the expansion. I hope you like this video. Please like and subscribe and things like that. It really helps me to continue to do these type of videos, and I'll be doing a melee video next. And let me know if you want to see that kind of video. Let me know if you're what should I do next. Thank you guys for watching this, and I'll see you in my next guide.